And also, I believe we have a dozen of our guests joining us from webinar, and I just want to say welcome to you all to our first Covering Environment seminar of the new year, 2019. And with this, I would like to also wish you all the best in 2019. For those of you who are joining us from the web and those of our new guests here in the classroom, my name is Murat Kasira. I'm a professor in the Biosystems Engineering and the Director of Controlled Environment Agriculture Center. And as I said, this is our first seminar of the year. And before I introduce our distinguished guest, speaker today to you, I would like to take this opportunity to thank some of our staff here who helps organizing this event for us. Rafi Gruner, our organizer for the Covering Environment seminars. Dave Bogner is our expert from CAL's Communications and Cyber Technologies, and Dene Pantoja, our program coordinator here at the Controlled Environment Agriculture Center. So with that, welcome again. And our guest speaker today is Emre Toker. And sometimes you may wonder how our speakers are actually related to what we're doing here. And you had a beautiful introduction actually with Rafi's advertising flyer. Today our speaker is really unique. At Academicians, we do research. We try to have impact out there in the world. But sometimes we might have challenges to take that research to the real world settings, to the commercial applications. As students, you may have great ideas, or staff has great ideas, and some of those might be innovative ideas. Some may have some relevancy to the real world or private sector out there. And that transition might be difficult and challenging, but it's not anymore, thanks to our expert and our guest speaker, Emre Toker. He's here, and he is the mentor in residence in College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. And Emre comes with a unique background. He has several degrees, a BS degree in physics from Reed College, and a BS degree in electrical engineering, Caltech, and a MS degree in electrical engineering also from University of Arizona. It was about 5 years ago when I first met with Emre. Actually, he was here at this Controlled Environment Agriculture Center to give a presentation to our students. And when I first heard that he was with CALS and with us, it was so exciting. So he's here to help us and to help us with the transition from academics to the entrepreneurship setting. So it's great pleasure to have Emre again, and Emre, the floor is yours. Thank you for presenting today for us.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Okay, hello to everybody here and those on the web. I'll talk to you a little bit about what I call the why and how of entrepreneurship in a university setting. It's going to involve a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of very practical things, so we'll try to cover a broad spectrum of things that might be of interest to you. So where I want to start is with a little fact. 85 institutions in the world have been able to survive since 1522. And the Catholic Church, British Parliament, etc. And the interesting thing from our point of view is 70 of these institutions of the 85 are universities. Now, why did I put this fact up? Because it kind of indicates to us that universities are really in it for the very long run. And this year, this decade, hooray, innovation, entrepreneurship. But generally speaking, universities have a very long-term perspective of what their mission is and what they wish to do. So I don't need to say this to this audience, but the historical role of the research university has been to create and disseminate new knowledge. And recently, let's say, a new challenge has been given to universities by society, which is don't just create and disseminate new knowledge, show us how this knowledge is going to be applied so that we can generate social impact also through innovation and entrepreneurship. And the question is how to incorporate this so-called innovative and entrepreneurial thinking into the fabric of an established research university. The short answer is very carefully, in my opinion, personal opinion. By the way, if I may stop for just 1 second here, as I understand it, 45 minutes to talk and then maybe 15 minutes for Q&A. Would you please raise your hand when I'm at the 40-minute mark? I appreciate it very much because I turned off my iPhone. So stare at the slide for a few seconds. Why? As in, why are we here? All of us, yourself, myself, etc. And I'm going to argue that the reason why we're here is this number, 6 over 1,000. So what does this number 6 over 1,000 signify? The denominator, 1,000, is 1,000 new great innovations, vetted a little bit, that is coming out and looking for resources so that they can become realized. And 6, unfortunately, is the typical number of those innovations that achieve success. 6 over 1,000. So the starting point is a very, very tough point. So in light of this number, particularly if you're a student, would you say the logical thing to do is to give up on entrepreneurship? If the probability is 6 over 1,000, I better just go and look for a job and work at that job and just, go on with my life. But there are some people in the world who may have a chip on their shoulder, and they say, not only am I in the 6 out of 1,000, I'm actually 2 out of 1,000. And all I want is an opportunity to prove it to the world and to myself. So those types of people become the type of people that we read about who are able to create very successful innovations. Now the country, United States, as well as university and a lot of other people attempt to scale the denominator. So instead of 1,000 ideas, let's get 10,000 ideas so that instead of 6, we'll have 60 successful innovations. Well, I'm from Turkey. We couldn't do that in Turkey. We couldn't afford it. It seems like a pretty inefficient way to grow the numbers by growing the denominator. So my job at the University of Arizona, as a matter of fact, everything that I do is associated with how do we scale the numerator? How do we increase the success rate from 6 to 7 to 8 to 20? Is it possible? Is it just luck? What parts are teachable? What parts are not teachable? That's my primary area of interest. Now, the way I look at innovations and innovators is by using the analogy of horses and jockeys. So the horse is the idea, and the jockey is the innovator or the entrepreneur that's going to ride the horse. So let's take students, for example. Typically, they will not have a great horse because they have not yet had enough life experiences to come up with a fantastic horse. In that case, we try to train the jockey so that 10 years down the line, if they come across a thoroughbred, we will have given them the tools with which to run that thoroughbred. Let's take faculty. Researchers may have a terrific thoroughbred in their hands, in their lab, but they may not have much experience riding that thoroughbred to full success all the way to the end zone, in which case we do have some teachable things that we could share with you in terms of how to ride a terrific thoroughbred. So my students used to call me mentor and tormentor. And so I'm going to really depress you for the next few slides, and then we'll get out of that depression into a happier state. So my job is to present reality without destroying students' enthusiasm and passion and so on. So that's the end goal. But let's start with a reality check. So Mike Tyson, whom some of you may know, said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So it's easy to make a plan about how this innovation is going to change the world and so on and so forth, and then we step out into the real world and Mike Tyson is waiting for us. In a university environment, maybe not proper to talk about people punching each other, so Steve Blank says no business plan survives first contact with the customer, with the actual customer. Another way of saying the same thing. Now you're going to see some sad babies. Just bear with me for a few seconds because I want to emphasize this, because there is quite a bit of hype about this and we want to ground ourselves in reality. Even venture capital backed startups, and we'll use startups and innovations interchangeably, 3 out of 4 of them fail. So 75% of the time they fail. This is not RO1 that you're familiar with. It's ROI, as in return on investment. So some innovator tells us, if you give me $100,000, this will be so fantastic that you'll make $10 million. That's return on investment. 95% of the time that doesn't come true. Some more examples of crying babies. 3% of the time, $0 exit value means the startup trying to get that innovation into the real world ends up with a $0 valuation, 73% of the time. And then yet another example of 1,000 companies coming in and only 225 coming out. Okay, so back to the argument again. Boy, this is so terrible that there is no sense in trying. Why are you even here? So I'm going to now tell you something anecdotal and then what I learned from that anecdotal experience. So I was either lucky enough, definitely not smart enough in the sense of the analytical intelligence that you may be thinking about, of creating 3 startups. 2 of them were acquired by public companies. 1 of them was acquired by a private equity company. So I was able to consecutively 3 times build successful innovations that ended up with a great result. So I go to my wife and I say, you're married to 1 in 5 million, 6 over 1,000 times 6 over 1,000 times 6 over 1,000. She knows me well enough, so sends me back on my way. And some people argue that these are correlated. If you are successful in one startup, the chances of being successful in the next is higher. I tell you, the last startup is where I lost all the hair, and it was miserable, really miserable. So I don't believe in the correlation theory based on my experiences. So I hope to be a thoughtful person. So instead of beating my chest, look what I achieved, I wanted to look at what was responsible for what I was able to do. And my conclusion was the reason why people are unable to beat the odds, so to speak, get into that 6 over 1,000 category, is because winning at creating and building and making a success out of an innovation requires not just academic know-how, but also different types of know-how, which I'm calling entrepreneurial know-how. So the example of chess, for example, is one of strategy, thinking 6 moves ahead. But in entrepreneurship, almost by definition, you have a weak hand. So the only place that I know where you have a good chance of winning with a weak hand is poker. So in an audience like this, I would say, who plays chess well? Who plays both chess and poker well? You have the possibility of becoming a good entrepreneur. Street smarts coupled with book smarts, and then an understanding of, especially for students again, for scientific students, an understanding of the language and culture of business and the humanities and the liberal arts is a necessary ingredient to be able to succeed in today's world, in my opinion. I used to tell my wife when I had my startups, remember now, I took no business classes whatsoever in my life, ever. I used to tell my wife, 95% of what I do at these startups is human psychology, and 5% is everything else, including all the technical training and so on. Human psychology, I'm convinced of it, is the key here. Unfortunately, that's a little bit more difficult to teach. So we're very adept at teaching the reason side of quantitative analysis and probabilities and so on and so forth. But, for example, you see here having supreme self-confidence, almost to the level of arrogance, but at the same time, humility in the same person is difficult to do. Courage to fail. Again, typically I speak to student populations here. Our students are used to, getting A. If they get a B minus, it's, disaster. But as everybody says in entrepreneurship, you get whacked by Mike Tyson, and all you got to do is get up and fight again. So how do you teach that? That is difficult. We can only teach that, I think, through examples. Now, this psychology component, you can tell from my accent, I'm an immigrant, first generation. So, interesting thing, 10% of the U.S. population are immigrants or children of immigrants, yet 60% of the top 25 tech companies are started by first generation or second generation Americans. Now, IQ is probably distributed evenly across the world, all kinds of different types of intelligences that we'll talk about. So what is it that's causing this massive difference? I argue that it's psychology. Again, I hate to use anecdotal stuff, but when I came to the U.S., my mother had taped a single $100 bill to the back of my yearbook, and all I needed to do was, deliver from here. And so that was a great motivator for me in terms of the stuff that I did. I'm not going to show you this video, but if you have the time, and we'll send you the PowerPoint, you can watch this video. So this is a video that we made about our product when we only had 5 employees. We just put it together, 5 engineers. And eventually, through trials and tribulations that I'll touch on, just last July in 2018, this company that we developed, eventually after another acquisition and merger with another company and so on, was acquired for $85 million. It's not the $85 million that's my point here, but the point was, when you watch this video, you would probably laugh. These nerds, engineering types, nobody would have guessed that I was going to be an entrepreneur, including myself. So I'm going to touch on something about why entrepreneurship associated with this little story. The small why, what I call the small why, about why entrepreneurship. Look at what Stanford University was able to do. 18,000 firms created, generating $1.27 trillion in revenue. You can read it for yourself, employing 3 million people. And if someone says this is all about making money, by the way, they also created 30,000 nonprofit organizations. So in the early 80s around Stanford, there was nothing at all in terms of this type of activity. So all they have, I argue, over the University of Arizona or any other university for that matter, is just time. They were able to build their network and they were able to produce this type of success. I argue there's nothing that limits the University of Arizona from achieving similar results. But that's still the big why, the small why. The big why, I am 100% convinced of this, that entrepreneurship, as it says here, gives our students the ultimate opportunity for self-discovery. Self-discovery. You can become a fantastic biologist, and all you'll know is that you're a fantastic biologist. If you attempt to become an entrepreneur, you will get to find out how much creative intelligence do you have, how much practical intelligence do you have, how much social intelligence do you have. We all know you have tremendous amounts of analytical intelligence. How much emotional intelligence do you have? No one person has all these intelligences. Therefore, the question is, do you have the ability to gather people around you and point them in one direction and to tap into all these different types of intelligences together with you? Do you have what it takes to be a leader of people, in essence? For those of you who are squeamish, you may want to close your eyes at this point. So the big question in front of us, can this stuff be taught in a university environment? There is definitely demand from students teach me entrepreneurship. And the university is used to saying, yep, come to us and we'll teach you whatever you want to learn. But entrepreneurship is a little bit tricky. So a PhD in entrepreneurship, us on the dark side, on the industry or the venture capital side of things, we laugh when we see if a student comes, to us and say, I got a PhD in entrepreneurship. Okay, have you ever sold a tomato in your life? No, but I have a PhD in entrepreneurship. So that may be social policy and making and so on. But so this question of, is entrepreneurship a legitimate academic discipline? Can it become one? Is of interest. So my approach is, when teaching entrepreneurship, unfortunately, there's a lot of fluff and hand-waving in the teaching of entrepreneurship because 95% is psychology, and psychology, I hope there are no psychologists here, but it may lend itself to this, let's do a very quick pitch deck and see how you present it to people and so on. There has to be rigor also. So in teaching entrepreneurship, I have tried to follow what Mr. Einstein has recommended to us all. So I'm going to change pace a little bit now and talk to you about human evolutionary psychology of fear and greed and a few matters of faith. Actually not, that was a joke. Fear and greed in this sense is fear that this innovation is not going to work, and greed in the best sense of the word greed, the ability to create maximum social impact through my innovation, trying to weigh those out. So the term that we use, the valley of death, in this context, is anybody familiar with the term valley of death in this context, though not in other contexts? So for those who haven't heard the term, let's talk about a little bit about the valley of death in your context. So I suspect that many of you are used to this side of the valley of death, where academic and basic research takes place. And the beauty of this side of the valley of death is that the funding source, the federal government or foundations, have a very long-term return on investment expectation, both economic and social return. So for example, training of our students is good return on investment because money should go there for basic research if it also helps train the next generation of researchers, because that's a positive return on investment on society, for society. This side you may not be as familiar with. So this side we call money to scale. So this is where an innovation gets all the resources to make sure that it's spread out very broadly as possible. Now here, the funding source's typical goal, each one of these is a continuum, obviously, but on the average, on the mean, the funding source on this side of the valley of death wants to deploy resources to scale, not to prove. So it's already proven that the innovation works, and now it's a matter of we'll pour in money to make sure that we can disseminate this innovation broadly. Now we come to the middle, the valley of death, where we're trying to go from academic and basic research to a point where people are saying, let's put money into this to scale it. So this is the de-risking and the validating stage. And people who provide the funding source at this stage are people like myself and my colleagues, so-called angel investors, people with some capacity with which they can support early stage innovations. Now, what do these people do? They're in a tough spot. They don't have the resources of the federal government to support, very long-term projects, and they are not playing in the money to scale realm. So they have to do a continuous risk-reward assessment. What do I mean by continuous risk-reward assessment? I'm going to introduce this term, expected value. So conceptually, what's going on in the minds of these people is the following. So the potential reward, if this innovation works, it is going to have this much impact. multiplied by the probability of success at that point in time. So this is a continuous variable over time, minus the potential loss. You asked me for $100,000 to get your innovation off the ground, and I may lose it completely. What is the probability of failure? So most researchers, like, potential reward and probability of success, we focus on the other side too, potential loss and the probability of failure. Luckily, if you approach this in a systematic and robust manner, there is historical benchmarks that give us some guidance about probability of success and probability of failure. So I don't know if there are any biologists here, but these monoclonal antibodies, from the lab to FDA approval, on the average, when you're at the lab stage, there's a 20% roughly probability of success, historical probability of success. So investors are saying, okay, 20% chance of success, 80% chance of failure. What's the upside? What's the downside? So most of you are probably now asking, well, how much does it cost to cross this valley of death? That was a joke too. And so I want you to imagine something, because it's important as you deal with these funding sources. Even the federal government now is asking in their research grants, what is the impact, what's the risk, what's the commercial feasibility, etc. So to put you in the right mindset of what people are thinking, suppose you were issuing a new credit card to a population. You're a bank and you're issuing a new credit card. And you knew that the historical default rate for that population was 75%. In other words, 75% of the people will take the card, charge, and then unable to pay you back. So that's, funny enough, that's about equal to the average failure rate of startups. 75% of them fail, as we showed before. So my question to you is, how much would you have to charge in annual interest rate with this credit card in order to just break even? And the answer, theory is here, the answer is 300% per year. So when you look at a venture capital person and they say, I need to get 3 times my money each year that you're trying to move this thing forward, they're not really being greedy. They're driven by a risk-reward assessment. Now, there is positive social impact may also be a driver in terms of the return being sought. But at some point, in order to compare two opportunities, you also need to compare the positive social impact created by two opportunities. For example, one says we're going to reduce high school dropouts, and another one says we're going to reduce early pregnancy in teenagers. Okay, and they have some projections about the numbers. So a quantitative person is going to ask, what is the benefit to society? Very difficult thing to do, to assign a value so that we can compare the two to one another. Now, this is probably why I'm in this game. I really love entrepreneurship for the reasons that I told you before, but I also love science. I'm not a scientist, but I just am 100% in love with science. Why? Because of the scientific method, which has delivered, so much to it, and we need it so much, especially these days. So the question is, can we apply the scientific method to innovation and entrepreneurship? And the beauty is that it fits actually, surprisingly, 100%, very well. So I don't need to tell this group what the scientific method is, stating a hypothesis, designing an experiment, getting the data, analyzing the data, changing the experiment, changing the hypothesis, etc. This is exactly what we do as entrepreneurs with a startup, amazingly. So I won't spend a lot of time getting into the details. The PowerPoint will be available to you. But we have a little bit different questions, like the hypothesis. Our hypothesis would be try to answer the question of who would pay for this and how much would they pay and why would they pay. And we would, as you do your experimental analysis and collect the data, we attempt to collect data from potential customers. And we call this validated learning. And then we will refine the experimentation because we're listening to what reality is telling you. In our world, the reality is what customers are telling us. Derive conclusions in the context of your hypothesis and other contributing research. In our language, it is, what is the customer's next best alternative to this new innovation that you have come up with? That answer. And then our peer review process is by presenting our findings to people with resources, and they make a determination as to whether to make an investment to move this innovation forward or not. This is one area where the similarities break down a little bit. So in the scientific method, replication is important. Other scientists confirm and build upon your results. In the world of industry and startups, we really don't want other people to build upon our results. We want to build upon our own results. Thank you very much. So this is where maybe you could help me with how I can make these two fit a little bit better. The equivalent of scientific consensus in our world is the risk-reward profile. A consensus is reached on risk-reward profile that determines how much resources should be allocated to this particular innovation. So I'm not going to bore you with the details of this graph here, but I just want to point out, again, in terms of a mindset. So this is taken from the world of medicine, but I think it can be applied to any other place. What I want to demonstrate to you is the possibility of the application of rigor to very early stage, very risky, lots of unknowns type environment of the early stages of an innovation. So on the x-axis, we have reduction in adverse outcomes. Everybody wants to reduce adverse outcomes, but right now we have very little data. It looks like we can reduce this adverse outcome by 40%. But our data set is so small that it might be 60%, it may be 20%, we don't yet know. Therefore, let's make it a variable on the x-axis. Now, I'll take you through the summary of this, but let's jump to the endpoint. On the y-axis, we have profitability. And profitability, you may want to interpret as a sign of financial sustainability. So if you can reduce the adverse outcomes by 60%, then this innovation has the promise of becoming a financially sustainable enterprise, and therefore we'll invest in it. So before we spend a lot of resources based on where you are today and all the other explanations that you can come up with on a case-by-case basis, industry-specific basis, what would it take for you to be above a threshold of investability or below a threshold of investability? So again, don't want to lose you in the details here, but primarily, scientists typically, again generalizing, want to answer the question of, could we do this? Yes, of course you can do this. As long as we throw enough money at it, eventually you'll do this. But our question typically is, should we do this? And the should we do this question is, if it works as advertised, will it become a financially sustainable, scalable operation? So just to go through this very quickly, reduction in adverse outcomes translates into savings to a payer. In the medical world, it might be Medicare or other insurance companies. Leads to a reimbursement rate, which leads to a price people are willing to pay for your product or service. If you know the cost of producing the product or service, it leads to a profit, which leads to investability. In my time, when the doctor declared that this was good for the patient, we were able to sell a product. These days, when we go, the first question from administration is, how is it going to save me money? How is it going to make this hospital make more money? So the equation has become much more difficult, and I'm sure this applies to everywhere, including agriculture most likely. So we talked about the science of crossing the valley of death. Let's talk about, is there an art to crossing the valley of death? So one thing that I found interesting is to think of entrepreneurship as painting a picture of the future. So you have a picture of the future in your mind, a better future, and you have a picture of it in your mind. If you stop there, you're a creative person and not an entrepreneur. If you say, I'm going to start trying to build this future myself, then you're an entrepreneur, you're an innovator. So let's take Elon Musk, whatever you think of him. At a minimum, he's got a picture of the world in his mind. And even for this fellow, the picture of the future is fuzzy and uncertain. Why is the picture of the future fuzzy and uncertain? Because all the assumptions that he's making are also fuzzy and uncertain to create this picture of the future. So, for example, not for Elon Musk's Tesla, but will they pay $100 for this? Will it cost $50 to produce? Will 5,000 people buy it at this price? I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. I have a best guess, I have a best guess, I have a best guess. These are the tools with which I'm going to build the picture of the future. Fuzzy input, fuzzy output. So what happens is, similar to what we talked about, in the scientific method, you have a set of assumptions. Each assumption has a large uncertainty associated with it. And at some point, you have to jump. So you jump in, and what happens is through customer discovery, these uncertainties start to shrink associated with each assumption. Oh, okay, they will pay $80 plus or minus 20, whereas initially it was, $80 plus or minus 100%, for example. So as the inputs become more reliable, the picture of the future becomes crisper and crisper. Now the bad part is the picture of the future could converge to a death scenario, which it often does, or the picture of the future could converge to a success scenario, but one way or another it converges to reality, and that's what we're interested in. So thanks to Rafi, he mentioned something that I probably picked up from somebody else, which is fail fast, fail cheap, fail smart. What we mean there is that look at these assumptions, look at the picture of the future, look at the trend in the shrinking of these assumptions. How much of yourself are you putting into shrinking these uncertainties, and what is the picture of the future trending towards is what we do kind of almost on a daily basis. I was talking to you about a platform that we built. We said to ourselves, people don't want to become accountants. So when somebody comes to us and we say, well, what's your profit and loss projections or your cash flow projections and your balance sheet and so on? They say, look, man, I'm not an accountant. I'm either a scientist or an entrepreneur. Do you have assumptions? Just give us your assumptions. And then we have a black box that automatically and instantaneously creates a picture of the future associated with your initial assumptions and their uncertainty ranges. And as you close these uncertainty gaps, it paints you a complete picture of the future that is much less fuzzy and more believable. How am I running on time? How much time? Oh, 10 minutes. Okay. So this one, assuming it works, but with our great IT person, it's probably going to work. It's not going to work. Okay. All right. No problem. In that case, I have a few more seconds here. So if it worked, what I would have shown you was a video, but I can describe to you what the video is. So the video says, if you wanted to live in France and really enjoy living in France, what should you do? You should learn French first before showing up there if you really want to enjoy the experience. If you want to become an entrepreneur and you want to, really try it out for yourself for the self-discovery reasons, really the first thing you should do is to learn the language of entrepreneurship. French is complicated to learn. In entrepreneurship, we have a maximum of maybe 200 terms that you should get familiar with. And what will this do? Just like when two scientists talk to one another, they use very precise language. so that there is no misinterpretation or anything like that. It's an efficient conversation. Similarly, when an entrepreneur is talking to another or to an investor, there's an expectation of a certain language to be used, and to learn it is easy, just 200 terms. For a group like yours, it's essentially trivial. So my recommendation to most people who really want to get most out of this thing called entrepreneurship that everybody is excited about, if you don't want to become a so-called wannapreneur and a real entrepreneur, let's do it the real way by first learning the language. The second video that I was going to show you is also a tough one, but I'm really committed to it. You have lots of students among yourselves, you know, that you teach, and probably there's some students sitting here also, and the same thing was applicable to me. Students define themselves automatically as job seekers. When I graduate from this university, I'll do what everybody else does. I'm going to write a resume, I'm going to send it to various companies, and hopefully somebody will hire me, and then life is going to catch up with me, home, children, and so on, and I'll be working for someone forever and ever. Likely scenario, but did you ever think of what is special about these people who actually became job creators? You know, your heroes of you know, Zuckerberg or the Google boys and so on and so forth. What was special about them? What parts of their upbringing, let's call it, is teachable? How can we get you to start thinking of yourself? Or I'm not going to push you to think of yourself as a job creator. I'm going to push you to think of why I have never thought of myself as a potential job creator, even if it's 10 years down the line. I want to plant the seed of this is something that I can do, and let me see what other people did who reached that state, and let me see which ones of these I have or I don't have. Remember the intelligences that I mentioned to you. Do I have what it takes? Can I build the confidence to let people with other intelligences work with me, together with me, follow me as a leader? These types of questions our students, at least the ones that I've seen, do not typically ask themselves. And one of my goals here is to make them start asking questions of this type. So I'm very curious to hear all your questions, comments, pushback, feedback, any type of input you can give me, and if you allow me, I'm going to take this heavy jacket off. Yes, sir. I'll repeat your question if you like, or yeah, go ahead.
Emre, we welcome you to the Controlled Environment Ag Center. We're thrilled that you're here, and we believe that we're on the bleeding edge of entrepreneurship, but the University of Arizona hasn't figured that out yet. So very specifically, in 2011, my organization, Innovative Technologies Development Center, a nonprofit, we invested $30,000 to bring 3 Thunderbird graduates to come here to CEAC to write a business plan to turn it into a profit center. And along the way, we ended up winning a $100,000 Science Foundation inaugural grant because we connected ASU's norovirus edible vaccine with Dr. Kubota's tomatoes here in Tucson, U of A and ASU. And then, as an angel, we got Eurofresh to look at some grafted seedling transplants, and we failed fast, and we failed cheap, and we failed smart.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
So I just want to welcome you to the CEAC, where that spirit of entrepreneurship lives. We're thrilled that you're here and look forward to working together with you moving forward.
Super. I appreciate that very much. And I want to tell you, I'm overhead on the university, so I'm a service provider. Anything that you want, my job is to come and try to do my best to assist. So feel free to shoot me an email at any time, and I'll show up the next day.
Right. Emre, thank you so much for your exciting presentation.
Thank you.
I hope our audience here are as excited as I am, and maybe visualizing some of the opportunities that we could have and then work with you in a collaborative way, and not only for the faculty but also students. I think you're really emphasizing working with students and also staff too.
Absolutely. Faculty, staff,
right.
students, all.
Yeah, I'm sure our audience have a lot of questions.
Emre, this was, for me, a very exciting presentation. And since you did a number of anecdotes, I want to tell you one of mine. When I first joined the Science and Technology Park on Rita Road, I was at a meeting with the staff, and Bruce Wright, whom you know, turned to me after turning to other people and said, so what's your ask? And I looked at him and I said, I don't understand. I thought ask was a verb. You term it like it's a noun. What is ask? That shows you my level of naivete. When I joined that unit, and I eventually became Director of Technology Innovation for 5 years. But in any case, one of the slides that you showed immediately raised the hair in the back of my neck, hair which I no longer have. And I noticed that your equation about how much an angel investor needs to ask the entity that he or she is investing in order to just break even. And the assumption, which you didn't state, was, I am an angel investor. I am taking zero risk. How does that work?
What do you mean I'm taking zero risk, though?
If you go into an investment situation and you use that equation, it guarantees that you'll break even, and in that case, you don't have a risk as an investor.
I see.
And what's wrong in my interpretation?
I see. But first, I want to hit on something. I think, like, not knowing the definition of ask in that context is not naivete, but just terminology. So what I mentioned about, like, understanding the 200 terms, ask is one of them, would be one way to look at this. So with respect to your question, so we get a lot of people coming to us asking for investment, and we need to have a return on investment expectation from each one that comes to us. Historically, we know that if we make 100 investments, 80 of them are going to go to zero. So the argument is that the 20 or the 2 out of 10 that deliver the goods is going to cover all our mistakes, cover all our money that we invested in the ones that failed, and also provide us with a return. And so that is why the return on investment expectation on every single person that comes to us for investment is super high, because we're too dumb to know which one among the 10 is going to be the winner. So we assume each one of those is going to be the winner, and that person has to cover all our losses. If I were to ask for a threefold increase in, the valuation, let's say, of the company on a per year basis, on the average, you're right, I would get no return. I would just break even. And that is why people have, like, return on investment expectations of not just 3 multiplied 5 years in a row, but 100-fold return on expectation. So this is one of the difficulties with the venture capital model, which is, if you cannot become a billion-dollar company, don't bother me. Because I need that type of one return to cover all my other silly investments that I made. So I'm sure that paradigm is going to change also over time. That it's a funny thing that doesn't quite make sense, where you make 10 bets and one of them is going to hopefully bring you 100-fold your money, and you'll pay for the silly bets that you made. Why don't we make this a more rigorous approach? published something on LinkedIn where I said, will deep learning predict startup success? Can deep learning replace venture capital at some point in time? Probably, but only if we can collect data, vast data from many startups that failed or that succeeded, and start collecting this data. When you go to venture capital, they'll say, we only invest in diagnostics, or we only invest in therapeutics because they have their own little private database. So one of the things I've been pitching to various universities is a university should step up to the plate and say, we will have a national database of startup and founder key performance indicators. Because it's a university, people will trust the university in sharing their data and their information that's anonymized. And the university has the intellectual capacity to build and interpret the data. So in terms of moving towards artificial intelligence, deep learning, to improve the success rate of startups, there's a lot that universities can do, but there's still a lot of gap between what universities can do and what they want to do that I'm hoping to bridge as best as I can. I'm sorry for a very long, rambling answer there, but hopefully there was something of value there.
No, thank you.
You bet.
Thanks, Emre, for your insightful presentation. So you have a slide where you show that entrepreneurship actually allows an individual, a scientist, an engineer to reach his or her full potential. And I cannot agree more, because I believe that being an entrepreneur allows a scientist or an engineer to become really full in terms of his or her professional identity. So, and thank you for starting to think about how to incorporate this knowledge or tool or culture into the curriculum. And so my question is, are you aware of other universities or engineering science programs, other than that one that you cited with a PhD in entrepreneurship, where they're actually practically incorporating the principles of entrepreneurship in science and engineering courses and programs?
Virtually every university in the United States and probably globally is now in the entrepreneurship game. And it's a difficult area for them because, in biology, you're trained in biology, you got your PhD in biology, you know biology, you teach biology. But in entrepreneurship, the students are asking, what company did you start? And do you have, what did you do? And so learning entrepreneurship from a textbook and then teaching it from a textbook to students is the common method today. And it's a difficult conundrum for universities, I think, because I may be a bit off the standard model in the sense that most people who have succeeded in the what they call the real world don't want to subject themselves to the bureaucracy of a university, and they say, no, thank you, I'll mentor and so on and so forth. So who has been able to successfully bridge the gap between practitioners respectful of academia and academics who understand the value that practitioners can bring to this game are the most successful universities. And you could name them as well as I can, MIT, Stanford, and several others. That's the model that we're challenged with, and there is a supply is limited of the people who have gone through this before. Up north, so I spent a little bit of time at ASU where entrepreneurialism and so on, entrepreneurial thinking is often mentioned. In my opinion, and I'll be a little bit harsh on ASU, unfortunately, at this point, but this is a safe place to do so. There is demand from students. They say, teach me entrepreneurship. And every university wants to have tuition-paying students to whom they can teach stuff, including entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship is big at ASU. Come to ASU if you want to learn entrepreneurship. But the quality of the teaching of entrepreneurship is quite low. So the name changes to learn entrepreneurial thinking. And my objection there was, we're pushing entrepreneurial thinking. For those of you who have heard of Theranos company that was created by a Stanford dropout sophomore, reached $6 billion in valuation, and had nothing, no technology, nothing at all, zero. And they conned everybody, the entire world almost. So I say to ASU, okay, entrepreneurial thinking is what defines ASU. Why not ethical thinking? Why isn't ethical thinking a major defining thing that we should convey to our students? Again, a very long answer, but you know, I myself am not quite convinced yet how we're going to make entrepreneurship a legitimate, teachable academic discipline in a university environment, and I'm trying to do my best to, you know, move the needle there a little bit, but I'm all ears about what you all might suggest. He had a question for number 2.
Thank you. Piggybacking a bit on what you were just talking about, I understand your generalized concepts of how to be a successful entrepreneur, but you are a mentor in the College of Agriculture. And so I'm asking you to kind of focus not in the generalization. Average age of farmers is 58.3, continues to grow older every year, so we need some new blood. And my question is, do you have any specific entrepreneurial advice to help Aggie students succeed?
Understood. So I think when we had our little email exchange, and you can prove me wrong on this, I'm of the mindset that there is nothing really special about agriculture or medicine or another field, even, you know, history, political science, whatever, in terms of how to prepare them better for becoming entrepreneurial in these various fields. One thing that I tell the students is my actual job is to prepare you for real life, and entrepreneurship happens to be a good vehicle by which I can prepare you for real life, and the importance of this human psychology factor that ended up accounting for 95% of what I was able to achieve. So I'm at kind of attacking them at the base level of how to prepare for life, whether you're in agriculture or any other domain for that matter. Because I would argue that you're never going to, especially these days, you're never going to be an expert in everything associated with a product or service that you're envisioning. You know, when I had my medical device company, I couldn't take care of software, mechanical engineering, you know, X-ray tube and everything else. So you're going to have to rely on other people, thus the human psychology component. So I don't care if you're an Aggie or a medical student, learn human psychology, learn yourself what you know and what you don't know, when to trust people, when not to trust people, and so on and so forth. Those are what I would attempt to convey.
So when it comes to the concept of entrepreneurship, one size fits all?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say yes. Yeah. When it comes to, well, maybe you should repeat.
When it comes to the concept of entrepreneurship, does one size fit all?
Here. Yeah, because there are people on the web listening. So
When it comes to the concept of entrepreneurship, does one size fit all? I think you've alluded to that, saying there's not an awful lot of difference between success in the field of agriculture or education or medicine or wherever it is.
And my response was, and I'm happy to be given examples that prove me wrong, but my response was yes, when it comes to entrepreneurship and the principles of how to become a job creator, how to think entrepreneurially, how to lead people, how to understand human psychology, one size does fit all. Technical know-how is just one component of building an enterprise. So I was telling someone the other day, I'm not building a product or a company. I'm building a team first, and then I'll take care of the product and the company. That'll come easy. And to build a team, I think the skills that I developed over a lifetime of building a team were applicable to any field. If I wanted to do something in agriculture, I now have enough confidence that I would build a team to do a good job in agriculture or cancer therapeutics. Same thing to me. Because the basic fundamentals are not that different. It's just domain expertise, which is available. It's the motivation of the domain expertise and alignment of the domain expertise in the way that you want to align it, I think is important. But if anybody thinks differently, yes, sir. Microphone. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, go ahead, please. Please go ahead.
Yes, I think differently.
Okay.
Absolutely. I would like you to come back to us in about a year and have collected data about all the agricultural startups that have been in process for the past 5 years, I'll say, and see if their failure rate has increased greater than failure rates of non-agricultural startups. And the reason I say that is because biology gets in the way, particularly in uncontrolled environments. If you can develop a piece of hardware that can go to the moon or Mars, physics will tell you you'll get there.
Right.
But if you want to grow a plant on Mars or on the moon, biology says it's not going to be that easy.
Right.
So please don't categorize agricultural startups in the same way you would categorize other. I think it's unfair.
I'll have to think about that a little bit. I'm not going to attempt to give an answer or a rebuttal or yeah. Other than agriculture, so for example, would your argument apply to development of therapeutics then? Because again, biology will get in the way. Yeah.
Wasn't an argument, it was just a statement. And therapeutics, I don't know what you mean by therapeutics.
You know, drugs, therapeutic drugs.
Uh-huh.
Would you expect, your statements about failure rate of agricultural startups, would you hypothesize that a similar thing would apply?
I might try to. I don't know if I can resolve it.
Okay.
Yes, I would.
Understood. It should, right? Yeah.
Emre, I just want to give you a little bit of time to maybe tell us a little bit about the educational programs or the workshops that you're organizing on innovation and entrepreneurship.
Sure.
So probably some of our audience are aware of that, but maybe some are not.
Okay. So we're offering 3 initiatives. We're experimenting with 3 initiatives. Sometimes it's unfair to ask the students, okay, come up with an innovative idea and then we'll start building that, see if we can build, a startup out of that. That's kind of a business school model. In order to give the students the best experience possible, what we decided to do was to offer an independent study course where we take applicants to the local angel investment group in the areas that CALS is interested in, including ag tech and so on, and then have the students perform a economic and technical viability analysis on these prepackaged, half-baked but at least not completely raw material, under the guidance of the investors, the mentors, myself, the founders, and have them subject these companies to some level of rigor in terms of economic and technical feasibility. The reason why I'm comfortable with this is the investors themselves in the Middle America, including Tucson, mostly are either real estate wealth or inherited wealth. They didn't start technology companies themselves. So this translation of complex ideas to lay people who the investors are is something that the students will learn from, is our experiment. So independent study to analyze early stage startups that are asking investment from local angel investors, number 1. Number 2, a workshop series that challenges students called How to Become a Job Creator. Again, I don't know whether the students will be intimidated by the title. Maybe we should have a softer sounding title. But the objective there is start thinking about what it takes, what it took people to become job creators, and which parts of these do you have, which parts you don't have, which parts can be taught. And then the third one is actually targeting faculty. And there is some overlap with Tech Launch Arizona. We were just discussing this. So where are you? Rafi was asking me, with respect to Tech Launch Arizona. We are probably upstream from Tech Launch Arizona. Tech Launch Arizona's mission is to monetize inventions that are coming out of the University of Arizona, and they're very much intellectual property oriented, but we know that in the real world, companies that don't have patents also succeed. We call them, execution plays and so on. And we don't know what types of inventions faculty or innovations faculty are going to come up with. So a workshop series targeting faculty prior to Tech Launch Arizona is the other workshop series that we'll be offering to Cal's faculty and staff. And frankly, I work for you, so anything that you would want to see that's in my wheelhouse that I can put together, we will attempt to do so, if it makes sense to you.
Do we have any more questions in the classroom? Maybe one last question we can take. Yeah.
There's a new person, though, who didn't get to ask
didn't get a chance to ask a question. Okay.
Hi, not really a question, but I think something that's really valuable to me and to students would be looking at case studies. Here's this company, this is the background of the CEO and the founder, and this is how they developed their company, whether it succeeded or not, because then it shows them the model and it kind of can bring it all full circle.
Right. In fact, great idea. So we had something called the F lab, the failure lab, like an analysis of failed startups and what led to that to those failures, because everybody is constantly being bombarded with the success stories of 3 or 4 companies. For each one, there is 100 of them that failed for various reasons, and I would argue mostly for psychology reasons. Founders attacking one another and not getting along and so on. Generally speaking, if the technology refuses to work or if biology gets in the way, hopefully we'll know about that at an earlier time frame and be able to switch to some other area. Again, I emphasize team first. If you put together a right team, then they will be able to find the problem that needs to be solved, and there will be some commercially minded people in the team that will point them in the right direction to create financial sustainability.
All right. Emre, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation and for accepting our invitation to present today. And when I've asked you first time, how can we work together? How can you help us? And then you responded, Murat, if you're ready, your team is ready, I'm ready. Just let me know.
Anytime.
You're so approachable, so welcoming. We are really excited and fortunate to have you in the college and the university. And thank you so much again. I'm sure there will be questions and follow-ups after today. So with that, let's please give a round of applause. Speaker, thank you again.
Thank you.
And I just want to mention that your presentation will be also available. It will be posted at the center's website. So for those of you or people who were not able to see it, they will be able to follow it.
Hopefully the Bayer CEO will not be watching it.
We will ask for your permission first, then
No, you can put
upload it.
You can put it on.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I think our next presentation will be the last Friday of February. So please join us again and have a great Friday and a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Wonderful. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Well, it was, people were engaged, which is